Hello, I'm Mandy Kirk at Prologis, and I want to welcome you to Moving the World, our podcast about the people and ideas reshaping logistics and beyond. Today, our Chief Energy and Sustainability Officer, Susan Uthayakumar, talks with Stanford's Dr. Arun Majumdar about how we build a cleaner, more resilient energy system. They'll cover distributed power, nuclear, AI, and why it all matters to supply chains. So, let's get moving.
Arun, welcome to Moving the World. We're thrilled to have you here today.
Well, Susan, thank you for having me.
So, Arun, let's jump in. You've been in the energy space for a long time. You are an expert in energy transition. How do you feel about where we are today? And what do you think we must do on a foundational basis today to be on track for the decades to come?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, energy is fundamental to our economy. It is also critical for our national security, and it has implications on the environment, including climate. So I think people trying to balance that and making decisions, whether it's a corporation or the government or any other organization, has to keep all three in play and trying to make decisions that will harmonize all of these three securities. So in that respect, I think there's a drive towards decarbonization, uh, given the issues related to climate, etc. But having said that, I think it's important to know that that needs to be affordable, and that needs to be reliable along the way, and needs to address the issues of security. And I think what we're seeing is that some of the solutions that we're looking at is reducing cost, is it's domestically produced, so in some ways it is secure. And so I think we have to look for solutions with those three in play in the three-dimensional space. I think if you ask the question how well we are doing, I think the new technologies are certainly coming down in cost, whether it's solar, wind, storage, etc. That's coming down in cost, and it's already economical, and we are seeing investments going in to scale. What we hope to see is a lot more emphasis on the infrastructure, transmission lines, other ways of moving energy, and also new technologies that could provide the diversity, which is also part of the security, and that includes geothermal. I think we're seeing a lot of innovations coming along, and that needs to get to scale. And in nuclear, and in nuclear, I was in the Department of Energy when we launched the small modular reactor program, and then after that, within a year, Fukushima happened, and we thought it'll be 10 years, decadal, delay. It's been 14 years now, and I think we are witnessing, and I really hope, a renaissance in nuclear. So I think those technologies are super important. And I would also add, there's a lot more to be done on energy efficiency, especially in the building sector, and throughout the infrastructure. And if we could get all that, the infrastructure built, the energy efficiency side, and new clean technologies to bring down in cost, I think we'll be in good shape, but we're not quite there yet.
Arun, you've unpacked a lot of the things that we have to deal with as we move towards energy transition in this opening statement itself. When I think about energy transition, I always remind everyone that it's global, right? So we're not just solving for the geography that we're in, especially when you think about energy security, energy affordability. And within that context, I would say that some countries are ahead and some are still working on how they should pace. Do you see leaders in energy transition and what are they doing today that others could learn from?
Yeah, I think on a global level, you're exactly right. This is a global issue. And if the issues of um, economic security, national security, and environmental security is the same for all the countries. And I also would add that each country is starting from a different initial condition, and they have different constraints. They're in different geographies. And so what works for one country may not work for the other in terms of the policy framework. The technologies in terms of cost, whether you buy solar panels from China or some other place, the cost is roughly the same. But the policy framework that is needed to address the domestic needs of various countries are different. And so I think we need to make sure that we give room for countries to transition. And what works for Switzerland, which is hydro, is very big in Switzerland, or other Scandinavian countries, may not work for the United States. It's just a different ballgame. But I think the technologies, we need a portfolio of them, and so that each country can pick and choose as to what suits them. But they have to build their own infrastructure, and that requires some policy help as well. And so I think that's it is a very heterogeneous state of affairs globally, and we need to give room for them. But I think the drive towards the three securities I was talking about is absolutely critical. That's universal.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into the different technologies that exist today. I would say that the primary technologies that we need to scale generation largely exist. And as you mentioned, the cost of these technologies has decreased tremendously. But I would also say they're not being deployed at the scale that they can be. What's standing in the way of adoption from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there are lots of things. When you want to take things to scale, and this is where the role of business comes in, and government policy, you need to look at the techno-economics. The question is, will it come down in cost when you scale? If you look at solar panels, for example, it's a modular system, so the more you did, the cost came down very quickly. Batteries the same way. On the other hand, if you were to build large nuclear plants, it had a negative learning rate. That the more you build, it actually became more and more expensive. So we have to turn that around and bring down the cost as we scale. So the techno-economics, the economics are very important because we want these to be economically competitive eventually without subsidies. So that's one. You need supply chains, and you need some level of manufacturing. And we have a global supply chain. That global supply chain is being questioned right now, and so there's a lot of drive towards having some level of domestic security in that supply chain. Very important. The third element is the infrastructure. We can put solar panels and wind turbines somewhere, but if you can't build a transmission line to take that electricity somewhere else, then we are stuck. And in fact, no one's going to build it. The same thing with pipelines, with natural gas pipelines, oil pipelines, etc. So the infrastructure, if it's already there, leveraging that existing infrastructure to, that just goes faster and cheaper because infrastructure costs money and there are permitting issues, etc. There are policy help, there are, tax incentives, financial incentives, and there are barriers. So how we navigate that is super important. And at the end of the day, if you're looking at scale, the public has to be on board. Because if the public is not on board, it's not going to happen, or it'll be, significant resistance for it to happen. So public acceptance, the return on investment on capital that people put, that businesses put, all of that has to be aligned for things to move fast.
Arun, your point on the economics have to work is a very important point because you can have subsidies, you can have incentives, but they will only take things so far, especially at the initial adoption of that technology in any country. That really resonates with me. The other point that you made, that transmission has become the critical bottlenecks also very much resonates with me and anyone that's in our space. I read somewhere earlier today that there is 3,000 gigawatts of renewable projects that are waiting to interconnect globally. That figure is staggering. How do you see the transmission challenge evolving? Do you think that you see enough focus and initiative today to get us through to where we need to go, especially with energy consumption expected to, go up anywhere from 30 to 50% by 2050 from where we are today?
I think whether just see a number as a reference point for your number, 3,000 gigawatts, the whole electricity capacity of the United States is about slightly more than 1,000 gigawatts. So you can, as a comparison, you can see how much of a queue there is for the infrastructure to be built. So you're exactly right. I think this is, in the United States, this is one of the bottlenecks. And I really hope that we get our act together. And what does that mean? It means the alignment of policy on the federal level, the state level, and the local community level. Because when you have to build a transmission line, all you thread various communities along the way, and they have to be on board. There have to be incentives for that to happen. And the grid has to be stable, or more stable, more affordable that way. And there are, so that model of getting the permitting done, yes, you do need environmental review, there's no question about it. But if it takes a long time, then, then things change. And I think it's very important to get the expedited process that retains its environmental integrity, but at the same time allows businesses to operate and get the electrons or fuel one place to the other. And so I think that part, I think we have to get our act together. And frankly, this is not even a bipartisan, this is a nonpartisan issue, because it should create economic growth, it should create jobs, and we need to start building in the United States.
I couldn't agree with you more, Arun. The way I see energy security, the way I see access to energy and increasing our generation and our transmission is so vital to having that economic stability and economic growth. And it is absolutely it's absolutely a challenge that we must all tackle, whether it's governments, countries, businesses. Now, let's go a little bit deeper into new technologies. You spoke about innovation that's happening in the energy space. You reference geothermal energy, for example. At Stanford, for example, the mainspring energy offshoot is a technology that we use at Prologis to generate energy at our Denker charging infrastructure project. What are the other types of innovation do you think companies should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, mainspring is a great example. I think if you step back for a moment, we already have, solar, wind at a very affordable rate right now. Storage costs, the grid scale storage, long duration storage. There's a lot of innovations going on, and many of them are at a pilot scale. Those costs will be coming down as well, and I think we're going to see that get more integrated. We already have lithium-ion batteries, but I think long duration storage will come on board. I think it's important to look at geothermal, and that is a clean source of energy. And enhanced geothermal, there's this deep geothermal. There's a company that got spun out from Stanford, also Fervo, that is really at the bleeding cutting edge of geothermal, cutting down the cost of drilling, and leveraging technologies from oil and gas to actually do geothermal. I think that is very important. As I said, I think I really hope we have some scaling going on in the small modular nuclear, because that will allow us to iterate and get it better and better in terms of the cost coming down. We need a nuclear supply chain for the fuel. We don't quite have one. We have something in the United States, but we need some security in that as well. And I think those are the technologies. And as I said, I think energy efficiency. Let's not forget that. I mean, our buildings are not the most efficient. Our appliances are efficient, but the building as a system needs to be more and more efficient. And I really hope that people, and this is already happening in the business, start leveraging and using natural gas for reliability, because we don't have the storage solutions yet. But leverage the cost coming down in solar and wind. And we just published a paper, in fact, this month or just late end of last month, on how can homes reduce their bills, and because people pay a lot of money for energy, and how can they ride through some disruptions that may have in power outages. And what we showed that 60% of the homes can reduce the bill by putting rooftop solar. So a policy framework need to be aligned so that we enable people to do that in an affordable way, and they can cut down their own bills. That's really important for public good. And with solar plus battery, they can ride through the outages, et cetera. So I think that's that integration of looking at it as a system, super important.
Makes a lot of sense to me. When demand is going to outpace supply, efficiency has to be a play in terms of how that ecosystem is going to be solved for. You spoke about nuclear, and you mentioned the word renaissance, and I very much see that. And I think today there was a projection of nuclear global capacity that was published. And it is expected to reach 500 gigawatts by 2050, which is a 53% increase from the forecast last year. Arun, does that surprise you?
First of all, I'm quite hopeful of that.
Yeah.
It surprises me in terms of where we are today, because the last decade has been pretty poor. So in that sense, the sudden growth, I think a lot of things have to align to actually make that happen. I think one of the things that we are now witnessing on the demand side, which is where energy efficiency is really important, is the dramatic growth of electricity demand because of AI. And it is a national security issue, because if you don't power the AI on domestic shores, this is going to go overseas. That is a national security issue, frankly. And so I think that will drive a lot of the new technology adoption, infrastructure build out as well. But this has to be done in a way that is thoughtful and that hopefully reduces the rates for people, the broader community. And I think, but that driver of demand is going to drive the generation and the infrastructure, et cetera.
Absolutely. You're touching on a really important topic. When we think about the roles that different ecosystems and players have to play in the energy transition and solving for the energy dilemma that we have today, how do you see the roles of companies? So, for example, Arun, I can tell you that energy is a discussion in our boardroom, in our executive meetings. Do you see other companies having those discussions? You interact with a lot of them. Can you share your insights?
I think in the tech industry right now, for especially powering the AI data centers, it's rate limited by access to electricity. We have access to chips, and there are a lot of innovations going on in making the algorithms more and more efficient. And so that is all good. And that'll become more and more efficient in the future. But if you're limited in growth because of access to electricity, I think the leaders of these companies and the boards absolutely have to focus on that. And so we have two sectors out here. One is the tech industry and the AI industry that wants to grow really fast. And the other is the electricity industry that has not seen growth like this for the last 25 to 30 years. And that was growing at about 1.1% per year. Now we're talking about, hey, we got to grow our supply side now at 3-4%, and that impedance mismatch, so to speak, has to be addressed. And so we just launched a company from Stanford called Gridlocked, which is trying to do that. The thing that it's trying to do is to firstly leverage the existing infrastructure as much as possible. So if you look at the average electricity capacity utilization on the grid, it's 40% or lower than 40%. There's still 60% or so on an average left over. And what it's trying to do is to unlock that capacity so that you can use the existing infrastructure to power the data centers, et cetera. But at some point, you'll use up the capacity, and then you need the generation to be able to, more generation to be able to provide the power. But I think we will see a lot of innovations coming out in this whole intersection of the tech sector, which is providing the demand, and the energy sector, especially the electricity sector, that is providing the supply, and everything in between.
That's a great point. In fact, I believe, Arun, you wrote papers on this topic. So data centers and AI, specifically AI data centers, are going to increase the consumption of electricity and power. But at the same time, depending on how that is structured to interact with the grid, it may actually provide a solution. And I think that is something that the ecosystem needs to understand better. And I think it behooves us all to put that into practice. I would love to hear more on that from you.
Yeah, so I think the data centers, if you look at the AI in terms of training algorithms versus inferences, that it's using the algorithms. For the training algorithm part, our grid, it doesn't need to be at constant power all the time. Our grid is designed to be 5.9 reliable, 99.999% reliable. We don't need that kind of reliability for the training. So it could go up and down, right? For the inference you do need, because when you're typing something, you need the answer coming back. So there are possibilities of moderating the demand for power, both locally or distributing it spatially, the computing. And so there are companies that are coming out now that is enabling the hyperscalers to be able to do that. And then moderate the power load so that the data center provides services back to the grid. And there's a company called Verus Power, which is actually former Googlers who from my team at Google and many others have joined together to provide the moderation of power, modulation of power, and provide services back to the grid. And I think we are going to see many more. There's another company called Emerald that is trying to move the load around spatially and temporarily. And I think we are going to see all those innovations coming out to provide the match between the tech sector and the electricity sector. And that's really a good thing.
When you think about the demand equation that we face, it's really clear that we have to use an all generation source approach, as well as how do you effectively manage the capacity that we have. So going back to the all source of generation, it could seem counter to the decarbonization goals or path that we've discussed, especially getting to the Paris Accord requirements. How do you see the intersection of decarbonization and all sources of energy generation?
Susan, that's a great question. And let me go back to my initial framing of three securities: the economic security, national security, and the environmental security. And I think it's important to parse out the urgent from the long term. We saw that, we learned a lot from what happened in Ukraine as a national security challenge, because energy can be weaponized as well. And the lessons that we learned out there is that when you have a national security challenge going on, you have to address it right away. Otherwise, you'll be out of power, electricity, or you'll be out of fuel. And that just brings the whole economy down. At the end of it, that'll be disruptive to people's well-being and families and all of that. So you got to address that right away and not worry for that moment on how much carbon emissions and all going on. You have to worry about it, but you got to address the needs of the people where they are and businesses where they are when you have a national security challenge. But these have implications. So what decisions you make at that time cannot be contradictory for the long term of climate and environmental impact of that. So the policy framework has to address the short-term needs, but also simultaneously develop the policy framework for all the emissions that you're making during that time. You are going to remove the CO2 from the atmosphere at some point later on, and that needs to be, the short, mid to long-term impact, and then also transition towards cleaner sources. So I think the climate imperative that we have is absolutely critical, but it cannot be in contradiction to short-term security issues, and the short-term measures cannot be in contradiction with the long-term environmental security aspects. So I think those are the kinds of things, the policy framework, and I think I shared with you a paper that I wrote on behalf of Hoover Institution on managing this balance between short, mid, and long term.
From my perspective, Arun, energy and access to energy and the demand that we're going to have to solve for also brings economic prosperity. So it's an equation that we have to solve for. And you're exactly right. You have to solve for that first, and then you have to determine how do you decarbonize and get to where we need to go to make sure that we can have sustainable practices. Arun, we always ask our guests as we wrap up this discussion on a statistic that has really surprised them. And given that I'm asking you that question, I think that I should also share with you something that I came across today that really surprised me. I learned that the United States has the largest number of operating nuclear reactors, 93 to be precise. And it makes up about 18 to 20% of our electricity generation in the US. And France, in contrast, has 56, but it makes up almost 60 to 70% of the energy generation of the country. And I was really surprised by that. Is there something that you can share with us that you've come across?
Actually, we used to have 104 nuclear plants about 10, 12 years ago. And we have gone down because we have decommissioned some of the nuclear plants. And I think what we are also seeing is that many of them can be recommissioned and relicensed, and the license can be extended. And so that's really a good thing, because if you have a nuclear plant that is operating, it's operating and it's safe, you really don't want to shut it down. You want to make it safer, and you want to continue that. I think what surprised me is the incredible growth and demand that we are seeing from the AI growth. That, if you had asked me about 3 years ago, I would not have predicted that. And that happened because of some breakthroughs that happened. And we are at that, I would say, an inflection point in that, and the discontinuity in that growth. What is also surprising, and it's not much appreciated, but I think it's important to note, is the uncertainty in the growth. Because every year we think we're going to grow in a certain way, then some company comes up with a more efficient algorithm. Some company comes up with, or the hardware becomes more and more efficient. So projections of growth, yes, it's going to grow, but there's a big uncertainty in how fast it's going to grow. And we all know there's something called the Jevons paradox. That means when you have efficiency, that availability of energy will be used by something else, which is true. But the rate of growth is the uncertainty that was a little surprising to me. And the growth rate is also, I could not have predicted that 3 years ago.
Arun, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed our discussion, and I look forward to our next discussion.
Susan, thank you so much for having me.
So that's a wrap. You've been listening to Moving the World. A huge thank you to both Susan and Dr. Arun Majumdar for joining the conversation. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Until next time, keep on moving.